where your brain is, right? I can't tell what you want to tell me. I can't tell what your perspective is. Because if I assigned all of you in this room one topic, you would still be coming up with different arguments based on that topic, right? Who you are, your experience, what you're reading, how you're coming to what the scripture or the paper topic. So your thesis statement is an idea that you formulate about that subject, right? Your ideas about it. What do you want to tell me about it? Again, topic plus significant. So, another thing, it should reduce the scope. You cannot do, I know Paul says, right, we should be all things to all people. Your thesis statement should not do that. This should be something that is narrowed. For those of you who have never found it, in each one of your class sections of Blackboard, there is, right in the left menu, what is it called, Mr. Burgess? Research and Writing Resources, I believe, right? And in there are the 5 modules that our QEP has set up to help you write a paper. The 3rd module is formulating a claim. And so it will talk about the 3 things that your thesis statement or claim should be: well written, narrowed, and debatable. And so those are the 3 things, right? If you want additional resources, that's a good place to start. So obviously well written, right? It should be obvious to us what you want to be accomplishing. Narrowed to a point where you can actually do all of the things that you say in that statement within the scope of that paper. Case in point, English 3, we give our students large topics such as develop a biblical response to human sexuality, right, which is a contemporary issue based on the creation story. That's too much, right? They have to be able to come up with a claim, then something very specific. What part of human sexuality, right? Are we talking about marriage? Are we talking about singles? Are we talking about homosexuality? Are we talking about transgender? Each one of those would be its own giant paper topic in and of itself. So narrowed, right? This is you coming up with something that provides me with a direction as to where we're going. Each decision you make closes off, right, certain choices and then leads you down this path into new choices. Okay. So, how do we get there? Here's some questions to be asking yourself, right? When you start with that topic, the good news is you don't have to know immediately what it is, right? Some of you, if it's part of your writing process, to maybe write the paper and then refine it, right? Does that ever happen to some of you? You can't figure out where you want to start until you've actually figured out where you end. If that's your writing process, that's fine. But leave a placeholder in that introductory paragraph, right, for what is going on here. So think about this. What have you noticed? What's interesting to you about this topic and why? What am I seeing that other people have not seen? Is there a gap in the knowledge, right, that I want to contribute to? What might I have noticed that is different than what other people are noticing? Is there, right, something I want? Is there a revision to the existing thinking, right? If there's a discussion about what the type of covenant that happens in Jeremiah, right, which is the example that's in the QEP, right? What do we need to be considering? So start here, and then as you answer those questions, then you can write an introductory statement that tells me where we are, tells me where we want to start. Your introduction, that first paragraph or 2, depending on how your professor wants you to set that up, is context. What is context? Let's have a little English quiz. Who can tell me what context is? No. Absolutely. I tend to think of it as kind of the environment, right? So if you're talking about a topic, nobody writes in a vacuum, right? Writing is not an isolated act. So whatever topic you're working with, whatever argument you have, people have engaged with this topic before. So you're going to need to acknowledge those things, whether you disagree with them, agree with them, proposing a revision, engaging with that, whatever it might be. So number 1, I'm sure your professors want you to make sure that this is something that is worth reading and something that's worth writing in the first place. So, right, so tell me why. Tell me what's going on here. You might want to at least say what the general conversation is that's going on here. Because again, if we think about writing as a conversation, you're not just going to walk up to somebody randomly and start in the middle. You're probably going to introduce yourself. Tell me where we are in this conversation. Explain what you see as the problem and then state your thesis. So all of these beautiful things, right, should be happening in that introduction. So, right, and it helps me figure out what your reasoning is, right? So if you give me the claim, right, which is your argument or your position, there should be hints there of why you're saying what you're saying. Okay, so do's and don'ts. I call them my lovely cherubs, right? My 18-year-olds that are sometimes a little naive, right, about what college writing, what academic writing is like. So we'd like to be very basic. So do state your argument. Do tell us what the point is, right, and why this is important, why you were making it, how you will make it. This one, some students don't know. Active verbs, specific nouns. Because again, if you say something like the Bible, right, or Christianity, first thing I'm going to ask you is, all Christians, everywhere, from all time? So those are the kinds of things we're talking about. So if you don't mean all Christians everywhere, every person who has ever been a Christian on the face of the planet, then come up with something that's going to be more specific. What are we talking about? And hopefully you've already figured out here at seminary that just because somebody says they are a Christian does not mean that they agree with you, particularly about key issues. Right? Are we talking about denominations? Are we talking about, right, lay people versus ministers? What are we talking about here? Be specific. Because the more specific you can make this, the clearer this is going to be. Now, this is why, look at the don'ts. You need to double check with your professor. If your professor has a different idea about this, don't do what I say, do what they say. But it does not necessarily have to be the last statement. Is that traditional? Absolutely it is. But I've seen it other ways. I've also seen some professors that don't want your thesis statement until the conclusion. I had a graduate professor who was like that. So again, if you need to switch that around, right, figure out what you need to do so that you can fulfill those goals and expectations. Now, I've also heard that it has to be one sentence. Not always. Sometimes, right, if you need two sentences, now, should those sentences make sense together, right, and be close to one another? Yes, absolutely. But, again, double check with that. And also, I get a lot of, well, does it have to preview all of my main points? Not always. It can just be your overall argument, and then you choose, do you want to then forecast what those three major supporting points are? I believe this because of A, B, and C. So you can do that. But I have some students then tell me all the time, well, aren't I giving too much away, right? Shouldn't I leave some mystery here? I want to talk about that in more detail later on. If that is you, then just give me the I believe this, right, for this particular or overall reason, and then you know then you're going to give me those major points in the paper itself. Okay, so here's what it should not do. These are what I call weak thesis statements, so try to stay away from these. Number one is makes no claim whatsoever. Now, again, keep in mind, if your professor just wants you to write a summary paper, then you will probably do the first one, right? If you are just informational kind of thing, that's different. But again, if they're asking you to take a position, you need to do more than just, and these are all thesis statements that I have gotten over the years. Right? So if I have a student says, this paper examines the pros and cons of, right, fill in the blank. Great. I have no idea now, right, what you think about any of those things. I don't know where we're leaning. I don't know if there's more pros than cons. I have no idea what's going on here. That's too general. Obviously true or factual. This is another personal favorite of mine. We're doing Introduction to Literature right now with my college students, and I get a lot of, well, this author needs Jesus. Yes, absolutely right. If you read secular literature, a lot of these authors were not believers. So yes, I got that. However, right, that is an obviously true or factual statement that doesn't tell me why they need Jesus, doesn't tell me what Jesus would have done in that particular context. So it's another one of my favorites. Exercise is good for you. Yes, right? Again, no one's going to argue with that. That's not debatable. It's the start of something, right? Maybe you want to tell me what kind of exercise is going to be the best for you. But in its current form, these are not going to work. I love this. Restates conventional wisdom. I've gotten a lot of these over the years. Love conquers all. It is so beautiful, right? Love is patient. Love is kind. Yes, right. Awesome. Beautiful. But again, I don't know what that means, right? Are you saying that because you think we don't believe that anymore? Now that would be an argument, right? Establish the tension that's happening here. Or we say we believe it, but our actions prove otherwise. Now we're getting to something that's going to be a thesis statement. Offers personal conviction for the basis of the claim. I get this quite a bit because the student says, well, if I believe it, then it must be true, right? Yeah, not necessarily. Shopping malls are wonderful places. I get this a lot, sometimes from my ladies, but I'll tell you the truth, I despise shopping. So this is not a true statement for me. And if you just tell me, right, Miss Winnie here in the front, if you tell me that, well, you think that it is true, already then you and I are probably at an impasse, and I'm not going to be able to follow you along this line of thinking. Again, why? Also, you'll notice here it gives me sort of a claim here, but there's also no reason or significance attached to it. So these are good places to start, but you're going to need to add something to the end. Or again here, overly broad claim. Individualism is good. Number one, I don't even know how you are defining individualism, right? Are we talking about free will? Are we talking about who we are created to be in Christ, right, with our own unique abilities? What are we talking about here? It's too big. I have no idea where we're going to be able to go from here. And also, my college students are only writing about 4 to 5, sometimes maybe 8 to 10 pages. I cannot cover every single thing that this topic, right, this statement suggests that I would need to cover in order to make this good or comprehensive. So again, right, it helps you out. So I say, and you'll notice, right, when I send these to you, that these are actual hyperlinks to additional sources that are outside. I started when I was a graduate student at Texas A&M, I was their associate director of the Writing Center for a while. So writing centers are great resources for additional help in these areas. So Texas A&M's Writing Center has a really nice sort of how-to guide on thesis statements. Purdue's online writing lab called OWL is another really great resource, and those links will take you to some other places for additional help. So I say start here. If you are one of those almost like Mad Libs kind of an approach, right? If you need a structure or an outline for where you can start, try something that is this basic, right? Get your thoughts, fill in the blank. Now, notice then, though, that will change as you write the paper. Try not to stick with this, because I know your brains are better than this. You can write in a more sophisticated way than this. But this is a place to start. Have it be a placeholder. Figure out your ideas. Write the paper. Because some of my students will look at me and say, well, but I have to have a thesis statement. I can't write past the first paragraph if it's not there. Perfect. Okay. Come up with something then that gets you going in that direction, and then revise it as you go along. Because I would then go one step farther. I tell my students, don't give me something that says, I believe that, right? Make it more sophisticated. This is the place to start, but it shouldn't necessarily be where you end. Okay, questions? How are we doing on time, Mr. Burgess?
We have about 10 minutes.
Okay, so I think that's pretty much my last one. So questions, as I tell my students, comments, concerns. How can we help you then write better thesis statements to kind of follow this idea? Oh, excellent. Okay. Okay, while our online people are typing, we're waiting for that. Let me tell you how this came up again in English 3. So they were given 6 possible choices, 3 Old Testament, 3 New Testament. And then they have to, again, develop a biblical response to a contemporary issue. And so, but I got a lot of, right, a restatement of what the Bible says, right? So Paul says that it's, right, Jesus or nothing, right? Jesus is the only way. Or a lot of, we dealt with gender issues in 1 Timothy, and so then I'd get a lot of, well, women can't do this. Great, right? Again, but if you just make those sort of super factual statements, again, the paper can't really go anywhere from there. So then we tried to work our way through these things, and if I can get my students to talk through it, then they have in their heads what they want to be doing with it. Case in point, one of my students is Korean, and he wants to go back to Korea and engage with what he sees as a trend in those Protestant churches. So he's talking me through, right, why he wanted to work with gender issues, because a lot of Korean churches he saw are ordaining women, and having women take on big leadership roles in those churches. So now we have a tension, right? Now we have a context and a reason why he wants to do this. So his thesis statement then ended up being something similar to, right, this trend in Korean churches to, right, have women pastors or women in predominant leadership roles, right, is contrary to what Paul says in, right. So now, again, we've got something going on here. So now in his paper, then, he's now set up from that one statement, you can tell we're going to be talking about what he sees in Korea, what he sees as the rationale that those churches have put forward for why they're doing what they are doing, which then leads directly into his close reading of Paul's book, right? Let's contradict these things, right? Let's come in line, and then a plan of action at the end of the paper for how to approach those churches, right, in a Christ-like, loving way that still sort of disciplines what he sees as not biblical behavior. Did they finish typing?
They did. They just said they won't.
Oh, okay. Well, that was easy enough. Okay, and so for sometimes also what happens is sometimes you need to say what they say before you say what I say. And so that's actually the book that my freshmen read in English 1, which is Introduction to Academic Writing. And it's this idea of, right, putting what I say in contrast to that. So they say this, however, I say this. So if you can establish a statement that does like a tension or a disconnect, or even if you're in agreement, but you think maybe just the basic definition of the argument needs to shift, or you want to add your thoughts to it in this particular way, that's another pretty easy way to think about, okay, how can I structure a sentence in that way? Yes, sir.
My question is kind of on the relationship between forming a thesis and the available research. So I'm helping Dr. Paul Gould right now with a book on cultural apologetics.
Okay.
Well, on my own, doing a lot of philosophy of imagination and how narrative and theology and philosophy interact. And I'm finding that as we explore certain avenues of that, there's just not a lot of academic research done in some of these areas.
Mm-hmm.
The interplay between them.
Absolutely.
At what point do you just kind of take a trailblazing thesis, and at what point do you have to back away and say, you know what, the research just isn't here, I'm kind of overextending my scholarship a bit? How do you kind of adjust your thesis to that? I guess just any practical advice along those lines.
Okay, for our online students, let me repeat that question really quickly. If you have noticed, we call this sort of a minding the gap kind of moment, where you are investigating your either like a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, and you're investigating a topic. At what point, if you're noticing a big gap or sort of a silence in the scholarship, at what point do you say, well, I'm going to blaze ahead with this, or at one point do you say, oh, I can't do this? Okay, I would say lots of different avenues for you. Number one is, obviously, first and foremost, you're going to have to make a personal decision. So I would consult with those that you trust in the field, right? So if there is a lack of knowledge, is it because this is a new and exciting area and you could be among the first to then lead in this research? They would be able to tell you, those who are farther along, who've been doing this for 10, 20, 30 years. They'll have a good sense of the field and kind of maybe what may be necessary to then make your voice heard. So obviously, right, if you're working with Dr. Gould, he knows these areas incredibly well. He'll be able to tell you if, oh, I think that idea is just way too far out in left field, or, hey, I think you can actually do something with this. I would say also, can you find an argument that is parallel to yours that then you could just then say, okay, this argument, right, let's just change the context of it and you'll find that it works in this area as well. So I can't come up with my own thoughts in a vacuum. I have to read something that triggers something for me, and then I use that as my jumping off point. So find an author with a theoretical background or a framework, or maybe a study that actually outlines, right, something that you want to do, but in your particular area. And, right, don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. Use these authors, build that foundation, and then you have a pretty sturdy way to then say, okay, this is my now argument, but I've already set up sort of, it's like in a dissertation, your methods section, right? Let me borrow from this. Here's what other scholars are saying. It doesn't have to be in that particular field, but then you're still proving that you're going with tried and true sort of methods, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, case study, primary research, whatever it might be, you'll still be borrowing from something already done.
We have a question online.
Oh, sorry, yes.
This is from John. We want to be clear in our thesis statement, as you have noted, but should we leave something to be desired in our thesis in order to cause the reader to desire to read more?
Okay, what does he? Can he be more specific about what he means there?
Why don't you ask John yourself?
Okay, John, what do you mean something to be desired? Is he answering? I wonder if John means, this may be then for John where he's not going to lay out what his supporting points are going to be, right? He doesn't want to say, I believe this because of A, B, and C. So if he does want to leave a little bit of mystery there, then just say, right, I disagree with churches that are ordaining women as pastors because it's not biblical. So then that gives you a general idea of the ballpark that we're in, but I'm saving sort of my good, right, my juicy points for later on in the paper, and I'm not telling you immediately, right, here are my supporting points. Okay, he's typing.
Perfect response. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yes, if that is your style, absolutely. Go with that. Give us something that is, again, that sort of the topic plus the significance, but then you don't have to tell me everything you think up front, but you still have to tell me what direction we're going in. If you think about a thesis statement as sort of a roadmap, you got to tell me which direction we're heading in, where we're going to turn, right? If you've ever tried to give directions to someone, are we going by actual like compass direction? You're going to tell me we'll just go until I turn left at the Costco right on the corner? Are you giving me landmarks, something that tells me where we're going?
That is what I was looking for.
Excellent. Okay. Yes, but again, I have some students that really do like to be specific, and if they give me sort of that A, B, and C model, that helps them stay organized in their paper, so that way they've already told me up front in their thesis statement, and so then keep in mind if you do that, you have to talk about the points in the order that you did them in the thesis statement. So that would be my only caution to you there is, right, don't start with the last one first. It should actually be then in order. Now, it's up to you as to what order you want to do those in. I have a lot of students that obviously want to have that climactic ending, so then save that best point, the most convincing argument, save it for last, right, before that conclusion. But, however, some of you, if you're doing a comparison or a contrast, right, if I'm saying churches are doing this, but here's what the Bible says, then I might want to do it point by point, right? So churches are doing this, but Paul says this, right? Churches are also doing this, Paul says this. So then you have doing it sort of point by point, but then that way, instead of saying churches are doing this, Paul is doing this. Sometimes at that point, then if your reader, if we get all the way to it, then it's harder for them to see how those things line up. So if that's easier for you to organize it in that way, then that's a way to think about that. Any other questions? Okay. Well, again, last thing to be thinking of, use the resources that are available to you, and don't forget to look at those modules that are in the research and writing resources section. Now, this is actually inside your courses. You won't find this in the main course list. Once you have picked a class, then it'll be in that left menu that you're looking at. They have done a series of really great videos. There's 5 modules. Once you click on the module you want, there are videos there that talk about these things, and there are usually handouts or worksheets that... Okay. Well, there you go. But that is there. And again, module number 3 is the formulating a central claim. And they have 2 videos. One that specifically addresses a topic from Old Testament 2. That would be a little bit more, right, potentially what you're doing in your classes. But then they also have one that is just a more general video that's pretty well done and talks about ice cream. So that one's pretty funny. My students respond well to that. And then again, there's some worksheets there that will ask you additional questions to help you kind of get your thoughts on paper, because sometimes that's the hardest part. But when in doubt, this is something the Writing Center can help you with. We help at any stage of the writing process if you just want somebody to kind of brainstorm with or help you at that stage. But also just talk through your ideas. If your professor is open to you just sort of sitting down and saying, I think this, a lot of times in my experience, you already know what you want to say. You're just having a hard time actually writing it down, and just sitting through there and having me ask you the who, what, when, where, why, and how sort of questions. We can walk through your topic, and then you'll tend to stumble upon kind of your argument or what you want to say and why. So I think, as you guys already know, sometimes writing seems harder than it is, right? And we can do a mental block against it. And if you hate it, right, or if you're already frustrated or things like that, then it is automatically more difficult than it needs to be. So do whatever you need to do to help your own writing process and make this, because this is the good stuff, right? I mean, should be a conversation, should be you talking through your ideas, right? These amazing things that are interesting to you. And hopefully then some of these tips will help that be as joyous and wonderful. And again, when in doubt, when I was writing my dissertation, I would go for a walk and God and I would talk, right? And then by the end of that, we'd be like, okay, woo, got it, right? And sometimes it was me, being frustrated. Sometimes it was me thinking, oh, I can't do this. So whatever prayer you need to be sending, whatever that moment is, trust me, if he can get me through the dissertation, he can get you through whatever your writing task happens to be. So, well, thank you guys so much. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'd forgotten about April 4th. That's our grammar workshop, yes? Okay. Again, as the English professor, I get lots of questions about grammar type of issues. Obviously, there's a lot to cover. So one thing we'll be doing in that Libinar is there was actually a study done of undergraduate students, the 20 most common errors that students make in papers. They released that study, and so I'll show you guys the list. And then I'll let those who happen to be here tell me kind of which ones should we be focusing on. Because I get a lot of students that say, well, I don't do well with commas, to which my automatic response is, what kind of commas are we talking about? Because as you should know by now, commas go in lots of different parts of the sentence and for lots of different reasons. So we can start there if you want to with sort of missing comma with introductory elements, which is a very different comma than a comma with non-restrictive elements, or a comma with a coordinating conjunction, or a comma with a compound adjectival phrase. I've already covered, 4 or 5 sets of commas right there. So we'll go through that on April the 4th and kind of walk through some of those things that you might want a little extra help on. Yes, I'm sorry, yeah. Mr. Burgess says you can already register for those Libinars. And again, we just covered thesis statements, but are there still some research and style manual and RefWorks Libinars coming up? Oh, okay. Sorry, they already did a RefWorks. Okay, so am I the only other Libinar coming up on April 4th? Yeah. Okay, never mind. There are no more Libinars. It's just me now.
You're the only writing.
Okay, I'm the only writing. Okay.
We have ebooks and commentaries.
Oh, ebooks and commentaries. Okay, excellent. You can find all of this information on the library website, and you can register. And as you know, you can come here in person, or you can sit at home in your PJs and log in via Adobe Connect. Thank you guys so much.